Thank you, Jess. Thank you, team. I'm excited to be here. Actually, I'm opening up with a story from Jess. So when she asked me to be a part of this TED conversation, it was right after I had posted a photo of a triangle on my Instagram, okay, and explained this is how we define and work on complete athletic development, not just long-term athletic development, but developing a complete athlete. And she called me up over FaceTime and was like, hey, I loved your triangle so much, that's great. Can you give a TED Talk on it in 4 weeks? And I was like, okay. So I'm somebody who scream laughs, right? So I scream laughed at her over FaceTime. And then I said, do you know that I'm somebody who cheated my way through college geometry? There's no way I'm qualified to talk about a triangle for 18 minutes on a TED stage, but okay, we're gonna go at it. Here I am. And here's the triangle. We're going to talk about how to build a complete athlete. But first, I would really love to give some context to why this is important, why the current models in the sport industry don't work the way we need them to work in a way that also benefits athletes. So I have my own company as well, and we work with mostly youth and developmental athletes. So those are athletes that are coming into the system, for lack of a better word, in youth development, have big dreams of becoming pros, want to become skilled in their sport, and want to take it to the next level. And these athletes are really fun to work with because they're very motivated, they're usually pretty disciplined, and we can really have fun and see their progress from one day to the next, and see it transfer also from being in the gym to being on the pitch or in the pool. So the work that they do in becoming a better athlete and training speed and lifting weights and conditioning, those things then transfer directly to their sport. But a couple of years ago, a different kind of athlete walked through our doors and said, I need help. He had just had his third ACL tear and his second concussion. His name was Sam. And he was coming up on 30, which at that time is, it's still considered to be the older population in sport, but at that time I was 23 and thought that was funny, and now I'm 27 and find it offensive. So, but as I said, he had had 2 concussions and he was having his third ACL surgery, needing to rehab it, and he was faced with a very interesting decision that is not uncommon in the sports performance world, and that was either he could rehab his injury in 6 months, and an ACL rehab in a good case is 9 to 12 months, in 6 months so that he was fit on the first day of preseason so he could renew his professional contract, or he could retire. And I will never forget him saying to me as I was on the phone with him, saying, this is a terrible idea. Like, you cannot do this in 6 months. And morally, I'm obligated to say, I can't do it with you in 6 months. It's just not the right thing to do. What are you kind of thinking of? And his voice cracked and said, Julia, I don't know who I am when I'm not an athlete, so I need more time to figure that out, and I just don't want to feel like I missed anything just in case. And that broke my heart, and it also brought me to a sort of ethical dilemma, and that was I'm feeding athletes into a system that feels like it strips them of everything else besides sports. It makes them a product, it commoditizes them, and then it spits them back out when they can't perform anymore with nothing left. And that was stressful for me. So we built this pyramid, and I'd like to say I'm not the first one who came up with this, I'm just the one who put it in these words, where we have 3 different categories. And the first one is the player, here at the top. And the player is a specialist. And this is what tends to make the most impact in the sports industry. It gets the most attention because this is the sport-specific player. This is the swimmer, the tennis player, the basketball player, the soccer player, the American football player. They are very skilled in the specific skills of their sport, technically and tactically. They have the eye for the game, they can analyze, they have the body for it. They're very skilled in their sport, only. For example, a swimmer specializes then in their strokes. And if you ask a swimmer who swims, for example, breaststroke to swim backstroke, it doesn't work because I'm skilled in this area and that is it. The next one is the athlete, and this is the middle tier. So the athlete, instead of being a specialist, is a generalist. It's the step before. So here's where we expand the fitness qualities like strength, like speed, endurance, agility. This is where we actually give them the capacity to be better in their sport, and they need this. So not all specialists, though, are well-developed athletes. A lot of times, specialists, because they specialize in swimming or soccer or football, they are specialized only in what they need to get by playing their sport and nothing else, which makes them not very resilient against injury, which doesn't give them a great capacity for doing really anything else. And when they're not that athlete in that sport anymore, what do they have? I'd also like to say that the only qualifier for being an athlete is to be physically active on a regular basis. How many of you guys do regular physical activity? Just raise your hand really quick. All right, so we have a lot of athletes in this room. That's literally the only qualifier to being an athlete. For example, when I left, I did swimming, equestrian sports, and soccer were my 3 sports. I was a multi-sport athlete as a kid. When I quit my sporting career, as if, I still train, and I train like an athlete. I lift weights, I sprint, I train with my athletes, and I'm able to play pretty much any sport when I want to, but I'm not skilled in anything specifically. I'm just an athlete. So again, regular physical activity is what makes an athlete. However, as we said, not all specialists are great athletes, and that's really important to keep in mind because it leaves them vulnerable. And the very last one here at the bottom, or the very first one, depending on how you're looking at this pyramid, if you're looking at it like me or like the sports industry, is the human. And this is the complex foundation, right? This is the very beginning. This is where we start. And the qualifier for being a human is your heart is beating. So when you come into the world, you're a human, and you stay a human until you die. It doesn't have anything to do with being in sport, being an athlete, going out and training, sweating, stinking, whatever. It doesn't have anything to do with that. This is just where the thoughts, the feelings, the non-sport skills, the non-sport interests come in. And when sport ends, obviously, this is what remains. Even if you are a quadriplegic and you cannot move, even if you're vegetative and you cannot speak, you are still a human being. So the system, the reason why I showed you it this way, even from the top down, and it seems a little bit upside down, it is, because this is how the sports industry works. So unfortunately, in the last 20 years, we've had something called ESS, or early sport specialization, and these athletes choose one specific discipline of sport to specialize as a player with these skills in 1 to 2 sports by the ages of 10 to 12. We used to promise, sport science used to promise that this would lead to then an elite career. Your chances would be higher to make the pros. You'll be an Olympic athlete if you specialize in this one sport early. The last 10 years of research in sports science has proved this is actually not the case, that ESS athletes are 70% more likely to drop out before puberty. So, again, from 8 to 12, if you pick a sport, by the time you are 13, you have a 70% chance of dropping out of sport. And the ones who do not drop out of sport then have a very high risk of being injured, especially overuse injuries, because they're training the same thing over and over again without having a wide capacity, a wide foundation underneath them. And they're at a higher risk of burnout and mental health concerns. This is what happens when we reduce athletes just to their sport and don't give them any foundation underneath that. We don't give them any capacity or any characteristics, any skills beyond just their sport. And this is how the sports system works, because we're able to monetize the player on the top. We can't monetize an athlete, and it's really hard to monetize a human being unless you're an influencer. Hey! Now, during the 2020 Olympics, that actually happened in 2021, and I'll never forget it, that is so annoying. A very good example of this took place. How many of you guys know who Simone Biles is? Okay, great. Every single hand should go up. She's the best gymnast in the world at the moment. Literally so good that the stunts that she does are named after her, and they have to say, we're not doing that because she's the only one who can do it. So she's like literally not allowed to do her own stunts. Anyway, the actual best gymnast in the world at the Olympics pulled out of a couple of events stating, I'm having some mental health struggles. For me, it's best if I take a step back. It's also best for my team if I take a step back. There's a photo of her and a video of her vaulting. For those of you who don't know who a vault is, you run, you jump, you spring, and then it's Simone Biles, so she's flipping 8,000 times through the air. You can see her literally lost in space during this one specific moment where it looks like she's totally blanked out and barely comes to right before she hits the ground, and this is dangerous, like physically dangerous, not just mentally dangerous. So she pulled out of the next events, and thank God the minority of the internet exploded with, how could you do that? How could you abandon your team? You're the best in the world, step it up, suck it up, whatever, you're supposed to be great, this is the Olympics. But thank God, again, the majority of the world said, take your time. We support you, do what you need to do, take the rest. And then this tweet came and it absolutely broke my heart. She said, the outpouring of love and support I've received made me realize I'm more than my accomplishments and I'm more than gymnastics, which I never truly believed before. This is one of the best athletes that has ever walked the planet, believes she's not worth anything besides her achievements and besides her sports. And this is what the sports system does to athletes. Solutions. I'm not a person who brings problems without also trying to present some solutions, so let's do it. First, we're gonna flip the pyramid upside down and actually start from the bottom. We're gonna build the human. And we need to remember that human development does not stop when athletes start to play sports. When kids start to play sports, they don't lose everything else outside of that. And when an athlete's career ends, they're still human. They're still an athlete. They don't just give up who they are because they've been in sports. So like Sam, it's really important to make decisions with the rest of your life in mind. So Sam, again, 2 concussions, 3 ACL tears. If he rehabbed within 6 months, thank God he didn't, and now he is healthy and happy and chose to retire and has moved on. He could have injured himself again and injured himself more seriously to the point that he might not be able to walk or may have permanent brain damage, for example. We need to think about what athletes are when they step away from sports as well, that they have brains and bodies that will have to accompany them further, even though we commoditize them while we're playing sports for our entertainment, for money, for medals, whatever. We also need to remember that stress is stress. For example, yes, we might be in a sport dormitory or we might be at an academy, but there's still things outside of sport that stress us out. Maybe there was a fight with a family member, maybe a fight with a partner, maybe I just didn't sleep well, maybe I have an exam, or training was really hard. And all of those stressors, stress is stress to our nervous system. That's what neuroscience research has taught us in the last decade, 2 decades. And we need to take that into consideration in how much we stress out our athletes and how much we demand from them that they also have a life outside of sports. And it's unrealistic to expect that they don't. With calculating external factors, we also need to think that they need to develop beyond sports. They need to have friends outside of sport. They need to have family members outside of sport. This helps them to stay motivated, to have other interests outside of sport, and still have fun playing soccer or doing gymnastics or playing volleyball. That there are other things, and this is not the only focus in life. This is not the only thing that matters. Secondly, building an athlete. We need to train like athletes. And this is down to us sports scientists and us head sport coaches as well. It's our job to raise the entire baseline of fitness so that the athlete is less likely to get injured. We want to reduce injury risks as early as we possibly can, the best we possibly can. And again, as early as we can, give them this wide foundation of all of these fitness skills, this strength, this speed, the endurance, the agility, so that they are then better at competing in their sport themselves with a reduced risk of injury. And building the player, this is the one thing we're really good in the sports industry. So I don't really have too much to give to that. This is the head coach's job to give the technical and tactical skills, the analysis, the brain, and of course the player's job to put in some hard work to really master those skills for their specific sport. But we are really good at this, so props to the sports industry for being good at building sports-specific players. It's everything else we gotta work on. This is the pyramid that I would love to see. On the left here, we have youth sports development. We develop the human, then we make them a great athlete, and then when they're ready and they've picked their sport, then they can specialize in whatever skills they want to and be a soccer player, a swimmer, a volleyball player, a baseball player. And then when they retire, they still have all of that, and then we can break it back down. I'm not a volleyball player anymore, but I'm still an athlete. Or I'm not a volleyball player anymore, but I want to be a basketball player now. So we just switch out the top. We just cap it off, guillotine moment, and put a new player on top with a new set of skills. But they still have this strong foundation. And this is my dream for youth athlete development and athlete development, period. This is how we can create complete athletes. Now, I told you guys, we also individually have responsibility in creating complete athletes, and I'll tell you this at the very end, so you stick with me through these last solutions, okay? But here's the takeaways, I promise. Our theme is to invent the future here in sport, here today at TED. So we want to train like athletes. I already told you what this is about. And this is down to sports scientists as well. Organizational investment is also a big deal because federations, clubs, institutions tend to only invest in something once the athletes have already made money and they've proven that it's going to work. So why don't we invest in advance, actually give them the resources so they don't have to do without the resources, hurt themselves, hurt their bodies, hurt their brains, hurt everything else, and then give them resources later, which is just damage control. If we could focus on the prevention and give them the sports psychologists and give them the educators and also give them the clinical psychologists, the mental health care, the physical health care that they need in advance, then we could prevent a lot and not just rely on damage control. Mental health care looks different. I don't know how many of you guys have ever been to competitions, to tournaments, but there's always like an aid station with doctors or nurses or people helping out. And I would love to see this also for mental health, that there's clinical psychologists or psychiatrists or just counselors, people that athletes could talk to when they're struggling, when they're in crisis. But again, prevention first. I think I might be struggling, or I might need some skills to work on this. So they can just go and no strings attached, no stigma attached, get the help they need so that we're not always going into crisis mode and then stigmatizing the issues. So we don't have Simone Biles levels of trauma going on at Olympics. The last one is athletes need to take something with them into retirement. When we reduce athletes just down to their sport, we take everything else away from them, and that would make us mad. Like, if we were just reduced to, you're just a student, you're just a cook, you're just a coach, you're just an influencer, whatever, that would upset us too. We would be furious about that and totally demeaned, like, hey, I'm more than that. So we need to not do that to athletes who, again, are made products so that people can make money off of them and make medals off of them, and they are there for our entertainment. But they also need to be allowed to take things into retirement instead of always being tagged with, well, you used to be this athlete or you used to be this player. Because unfortunately, a lot of them are not making the millions of dollars, so they're not going to go disappear into retirement and have a big cushy life. They're still going to have this athlete, this human behind them, and they need that to fall back on. They should at least have something to show for it, for what they did in their sports career after they retire. And lastly, as I said, we all have a role. So our role is that we just should not be sitting idly by allowing athletes to be commoditized. We should be speaking out against it. We should be very careful when we critique athletes as well, instead of just lobbing critics into the crowd as if we could do it better. Like, excuse me? Watching the Olympics on Twitter is always very fascinating because it's like, okay, keyboard warriors, cool it, cool the jets. You can't stand up off the couch without using the armrest. Let's not talk about Simone Biles. But we all play a role in the commoditization and consumption of what athletes do. So before we log critics, before we bully them and harass them, we need to remember they're doing this for our entertainment. They're doing this hopefully because they still love it. They're still human beings, and we would be, as I said, furious when we are demeaned down to just one aspect of our multidimensional selves. So we should not do that to athletes. Let them be humans and see their humanity first, even if that sometimes costs us medals, if that costs us money, if that's a little bit humiliating, a little bit sad, a little bit disappointing. It's okay. Sports should remain entertaining. I hope that. But I also really hope that we can start seeing athletes as the human beings that they are and allow them to have that foundation, whether they win, whether they lose, whether it costs us money, or whether we miss out on gold and wind up getting a silver or no medal at all. Thank you very much.